Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us. This is the workshop on publishing 101, turning your research into a journal article. And I am pleased today to collaborate with phenomenal colleagues in the University of Minnesota libraries. And we have with us Dr. Alison Langham-Patro. And we also have Alexis Logston, right? And Brian Vitruba. So I want to say thank you so much for putting this workshop together. Publishing is an area that is critical to the success of any graduate student. And we really wanted to make sure that regardless of where you are with your graduate program, that you had information and best practices in terms of how to make sure you're thinking about your research in a way that it could be published. So with that, I will turn it over to our phenomenal colleagues. And towards the end of this workshop, I will put in the chat an evaluation link so that you can give us your input on the workshop itself, but also on future graduate school workshops that you would like us to offer. So it's really important that you just give, I think maybe 2 minutes is all it takes to fill the survey. So with that, I will hand it over to my colleagues.
Okay, so like Nora said, I'm Alison Langham-Patro. I am a library liaison to a few engineering departments, civil, industrial, and mechanical. And then I'm also the scholarly communications librarian. My background is very science and engineering heavy. I did my PhD in chemical engineering at the U now a long time ago. So I definitely have that perspective on things. And I'm joined today by Alexis. Do you want to say hi?
Sure. Hi, I'm Alexis Logston, she, her. I'm a humanities research and digital scholarship librarian. And my background is in English literature. I was a PhD candidate quite a while ago now, but I did not opt to stay in that program, so I left with my master's degree. But I know that when I was a graduate student who identified as first generation, I felt really overwhelmed and confused about the whole concept of scholarly publishing. And I would have loved to have had a workshop like this. Maybe there was when I just was too overwhelmed to even know about it. But yeah, I just wanted to share that little bit of personal background as well.
Yeah, and so when Alexis and I mean, we worked together in the past, but when we were putting this together, there are definitely places where like, oh, I've learned so much about what happens in your discipline, and Alexis has learned what happens in my discipline. And so we have a couple of areas where we'll tell you disciplinary differences are big here. And I'm going to turn my video off because I really love to talk with my hands and I don't want to distract you. Okay. Oops. So we are going to start by talking about the publishing process just in general. We will talk a little bit about writing, and then we'll spend a lot of time talking about how to choose a journal. And we do have a special guest visitor to talk there. And then we'll touch a little bit on copyright and open access, and then scholarly metrics and scholarly identity. And we'll finish up with our final thoughts. This is a lot of material, and I think Alexis and I both want you to be able to refer back to this. So we created a handout with some, it is kind of a worksheet. There's like some activities that you can do. And then I believe Alexis was also going to put a link to these slides in there, and we're recording it. So you can just sit back and relax and just take in what you can today. So like our title suggested, we're really going to be talking about publishing process of journal articles. There are plenty of other different types of publications. I mean, certainly there are also books, but today we're just going to be talking about journal articles. So if you're on the outside looking in, This is kind of how the publishing process seems to work. So you're a researcher and you possibly with a group have done a bunch of really high quality research. You write your results up into an article and then you submit it to the journal of your choice. The editor of that journal sends it out to peer reviewers and they say, yes, great, this is a good article. And then the journal editors say, all right, we're going to publish it in our next issue. That's not how it usually works in practice. There's usually some, oh, I forgot the word that I want. Usually the peer reviewers will come back with comments. Pretty much every article is going to come back to you with some suggested revisions. Peer reviewers, it's often two peer reviewers review your article and provide comments, but one of the journals that Alexis and I were looking at last week seemed to indicate that there could be up to 8 peer reviewers for that one, which seems like a lot of comments to be getting. Regardless of how many comments you get, when you are returning, when you're resubmitting your article, you'll write a letter to the editor that lays out, here are all the comments from the peer reviewers, and here is what I have done, or here's a reason why I haven't responded to that comment by making changes in my article. It is part of the process, even though you might not see from the outside how many times you can circulate around between submitting and making, getting peer review and making revisions. Sometimes the comments will also require you to go back and do some more research. I can think in my field, it might be run this other additional experiment so that we can show whatever step that you kind of left out of your article. And that's totally fine too. Sometimes peer review does result in more research and writing, and ultimately you're going to have a stronger article after it. And then I did just want to point out that there can be a pretty serious lag between when your article is accepted and when it's actually published. So the last article that I had published was accepted for publication in December of 2019, and then not actually published until September of 2020. So it took a full 9 months. Writing, it's hard. I'm actually in the midst of writing an article right now with 2 collaborators. And the research is often the fun part of your work, and then the writing can be really difficult. We have a bunch of different strategies here and links to places where you can get more ideas. One of them is to set aside chunks of time for your writing. The Writing Center hosts these hunkers for faculty members, so you wouldn't be able to go to do one through them, but you can set up your own hunker, maybe with some fellow grad students. I know that I really am helped by writing in a different setting, and I'm really struggling right now being trapped at home. I feel like if I could just go to a coffee shop, this article would get written so easily, even though that's not exactly true. The link for more suggestions is to an article from the Chronicle of Higher Education. It gives a lot of ideas that you could consider to help you get started writing. And then while you are writing, you're going to want to pay attention to what the journal that you are hoping to submit your article to, what their guidelines are. And I have an image of the submission guidelines for the article or for a particular journal. And you can see that it will tell you what file formats are allowed, what the length of the article that's allowed. There'll be a lot more information in this section that we'll talk about in a little bit. Actually, I'm going to switch over to Alexis, who's going to do a couple of slides, and then we're going to introduce our special guest, which I guess I'm keeping secret until the moment of her reveal.
Okay. Oh, I guess we didn't figure out how we do the advancing slides, but you did exactly what I was hoping you would do, so that's great. So at this point, I just want people to take a moment and think about, how do you decide where to publish your research? Now, you might really not know right now, and that is totally okay. But just think about it for a moment. Like, what are some things you might want to factor in when you're trying to figure out where to publish. If you want to write something down, either in the worksheet you can, or you can just put it on a piece of paper, but just, think about it, and we'll revisit that in a little bit. And yeah, you can go ahead. So we just have a couple of quotes from some people that were asked, how did they go about choosing their journal? And I'll just read these since I think that's best practices. So we chose Journal X for 2 reasons. 1, the publication turnaround is very fast. And 2, they have an advocacy bent. We also knew that it was a fairly well read and cited. It was fairly well read and cited, and we wanted our publication out there read more than in a more highly ranked journal, for example. So they really put advocacy and turnaround time over ranking. Next. And then we always try to publish open access. We'll talk about that more later. But money is often a factor when we consider which of the open access journals is most appropriate for our topic. Then we default to journals that have an audience who could benefit from our findings. P&T, but that's promotion and tenure, is never a factor. We just need to publish, really. So impact factor doesn't matter, and we all know that's BS anyway, which also more on that later. So it's refreshing for me to publish where the audience is always the impetus, even if it's not open access. Okay, next. All right, and the big reveal is happening now. And now we have a very special guest speaker from the faculty to talk to you more about scholarly publishing. Karen Mary Davalos is trained in cultural anthropology, receiving her PhD from Yale and the MA and BA from Stanford University. Currently, she is a professor and chair of Chicano and Latino Studies at University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. Her research and teaching explore questions of representation, agency, power, spirituality, and feminist methods. In 2017, she launched the major initiative, Rhizomes of Mexican American Art Since 1848, which will produce a co-authored, multi-volume, full-color book and a shareable, searchable online digital platform linking art collections and related documentation from libraries, archives, and museums. And welcome, Professor Davalos.
I'm going to switch over to your slides now.
Thank you for that introduction. And I'm glad to be here.
Oh, shoot. Okay, sorry.
Let's see. Are they going to see me? Because I'm happy to let them see me.
I think you usually show up in the corner.
Oh, okay. So,
wait, hold on. What did I just do there? Okay.
So today I'm going to try to, let me set my alarm. I'm already wasting time. I'm going to try to cover some things you've already heard, but why don't you go to the next slide? It looks like I have control of slides.
I think I do.
Oh, okay.
I did go.
Yeah, so your facilitators, your organizers have already mentioned the thing I want to impress upon you. In higher education, peer review publishing is the single most important factor for getting tenure and promotion. So even in fields where the book is important for tenure and promotion, journal articles peer-reviewed journal articles are also important. So it's hands down the most important thing, but it's ironically or tragically the biggest gap in knowledge. So I want to encourage you, what your facilitators have already said, make it a priority as soon as possible and as much as possible. That's what my AMAP means, as much as possible. So this is being recorded. I would encourage you to look at it again. I would encourage you to go to the session they hold next year. I mean, every single year you should refresh your memory until it becomes like common practice and you know how to publish, where to publish. So gathering information is always going to be important. Next slide. So what I want to impress upon you is, there's things that you control. So finding the right venue is not just about, does it get you tenure and promotion? It's also, your scholarly identity. What are your future goals? how do you ethically define research? Does that involve other people, people without academic degrees? You know, and then the one I actually tell my students, where are you reading? So if you're reading in a particular journal all the time, that's probably where you want to start your first, you know, publication. Um, and those things that you don't control, they're obviously important. They're obviously really, really important. But this slide is to help you recognize that you have some agency, and that, you know, the stuff that you don't control, I would apply less stress to that. I would allow that to have less stress in my life. So that's why I'm beginning with this slide. You know, sometimes your funder is going to tell you that you must do a report, right? And that might take time that you're thinking, oh, that's not important. Well, it's important for your funding cycle. Or a venue might have a particular policy. Those are things that you don't control. And then, of course, there's other failures of higher education. You know, if you're a person of color like myself, or belong to a minoritized population, or a population that's been structurally disadvantaged, those are things we don't control. We know, one of the projects I did to create the journal Chicana Latina Studies was to survey all of the journals, the flagship journals in the conventional fields, to see how many publications they'd done in their lifetime on Chicana Latina topics. And basically it came down to, in the flagship journals, you know, you name all the fields, art history, political science, sociology, they've done like 3 in the history of their publishing, except for sociology. Every decade they would do a special issue on Latinx populations. And so they had like 3 or 4 every decade. So those kinds of failures we don't control. And sometimes we can't even resolve them in our lifetime. Next slide. Around the things that you can't control, once you land a tenure track job, you can control, you know, getting in communication with your chair and other senior colleagues about that tenure and promotion policy. That should drive some of where you determine where you're going to publish. And I say some because if your intellectual identity doesn't match exactly what they're saying, you know, I don't recommend putting your intellectual identity on hold for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, and then after tenure and promotion, doing what you really want to do. That's a really hard life to live. But learn about the conventions in your discipline, seek advice from mentors, find other role models, because, you know, there's not one way to do these things. You'll find people who stayed on the narrow path and did exactly what they were required to do for promotion and tenure. And you'll find people who found ways to deviate from the conventions in their discipline. So I encourage you to talk to people, and that kind of gathering information you do control. Next slide. So I was asked to speak specifically about interdisciplinary venues and venues that are non-conventional. You know, always these things are going to be the same. You know, you need to align with the journal's priorities. Ironically, one of the #1 reasons why people get rejected from a journal is that they didn't follow the citation style. So I don't think there's a culture in higher ed yet of valuing citation and valuing citation style. The good news is you can, you know, get an application to do it for you, but that is absolutely a reason why people get rejected. So don't, you know, do pay attention to that kind of information. The politics of citation, that's a phrase I use to talk about the practice that very many people don't say. So when you choose a journal, that means you are expected to do all the homework on that journal's publication history on your topic, and that you are expected to cite that material. That's the politics of citation. That's a real and fast kind of unspoken rule. If you're not building that field, then don't try to publish in it. So that's what they're asking you. Well, how are you building the field this particular journal is creating? Well, it's through the politics of citation. So you need to cite what they've done on the topic. Some journals, many journals have a particular formula for organization, very much so in the standardized fields of social sciences. You need to follow that. Always make sure that the venue you've selected, the journal you've selected, that you're aligning with the particular editors, the current editor's priorities. And then I want to use this other thing, this other hint, like, this is the how-tos, resubmission always. And I put the word if. So you'll be told usually right out that, this is the wrong journal, you go seek somebody else, or you'll be told resubmit with these revisions as I think it was Allison had on slide 10. If you want to go back there, it'd be great, because I love that circle. You can go back quickly to
Yeah,
slide 10.
sorry, and I will try to fix my issue with the screen 1, screen 2 issue that I'm having.
I figured you were showing it for me, and that's why they're seeing it. But I have another screen open. So this is absolutely wonderful. This is so real. I really love the way they started. So sometimes editors, it is absolutely true. I did research before I restarted up Chicana Latina Studies in interdisciplinary journals. They can have anywhere from 2 to 8 reviewers. It is arbitrary. There is no standard in the field of how many people will review your work. In addition, some editors are what I call compilers. They are not truly editors. So let's say, as Allison mentioned, your work goes out to 7 people. You might get back 7 very different ideas. An editor will sum up and say, follow these recommendations. A compiler will say, here's your comments, let us know what you think. So, it's your job, it's your voice to figure out how you're going to meet what they're asking you to do and what you envision. And I would encourage you to, now you can go back to my slide, I would encourage you to resubmit, because what I found in my research talking to interdisciplinary editors is that 60% of people, this is going to sound unbelievable. I think it was one more slide back, please. 60% of people who receive either accept pending minor revisions, accept pending major revisions, revise and resubmit, 60% of them do not resubmit. I was like, what? And those are just some of the kinds of ways editors will communicate with you. Reject, revise and resubmit, accept pending minor, accept pending major revisions, or just outright acceptance. The only thing that has to be done is copy edit. Very rare, but it does happen. So resubmit, always resubmit, unless you've been told, no, wrong journal. Okay, let me go to the next slide. So with interdisciplinary journals, what I would encourage you is do not dabble. Don't just, if you're doing interdisciplinary work, that means you're citing the kind of work that your research requires. You should understand the interdisciplinary matrix of the journal. Some are going to be like social science comparative interdisciplinary, some are social sciences humanities, some are humanities. You need to know that. And then of course, as your organizers are saying, know your audience. If you do know the number of reviewers, know what kinds of reviewers they're going to be, what is their interdisciplinary matrix. And you can usually understand that by studying the editorial board and the editors network, because that's going to be the first body of people that the journal is going to ask to review. And then let me go to the next slide because I'm concerned about time. I think this is my last.
It looks like there's one more.
No, I think we missed one. Somehow I missed one. There's one about non-conventional venues. Yeah.
So that's what I'm seeing. Is that what people are seeing?
The non-conventional?
Yeah.
So the non-conventional venues, you're basically, it's the same homework, but I think you just need more clarity around P&T, what counts and your goals. And then also the thing that I think is new when you're doing non-conventional venues is you need to look up things like rates of readership. How many clicks did you get, or how many repostings or retweetings or whatever the venue is. Like, how do they count? There's my timer. How do they count credit? And you need to have that language. And then the other thing that's new is you need to learn to articulate how this venue supports your scholarly identity and why it's significant. And then my very last slide, and hopefully I've not used up all my time, is, the real effective way to stay on target and have effective publishing goals is to always have something in one of the stages of research. So something's in the research and writing stage, something's in the under review stage, something's in the revision stage, and then don't inflate that in your CV. Be really clear. Things that you're thinking about, I wouldn't put them on your CV. I call that inflation. It makes people look overly ambitious. And then the advice I get all of this from Wendy Belcher. She's the person who taught me. She was the managing editor at the Chicano Studies Research Center Press at UCLA. So I think I'll stop there. You said I would have time for questions. Is that what we want to do?
Yeah,
now?
we have a couple of minutes for questions. And maybe
we have
actually stop sharing.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got some great questions. So I'm going to read one, and then Brian's going to read a couple. I'm going to make my face visible while I'm reading. So the first one is an anonymous question, and the person identifies as a scholar of color. Question for Professor Karen. My main block to publishing is that what I have to write about or contribute isn't valuable or will receive pushback because it's not seen as valuable. Some imposter syndrome. Advice around this.
Okay. I gave a talk, and this might be how my name's getting out there. I gave a talk to some grad students at the beginning of COVID. You know what? Higher education is a dangerous business. It will kill you. It will make you ill. It gives me lower back pain. It is not a profession that is healthy. Therefore, you have to love your research. You have to believe in it, and you have to create the narrative on why it's valued. Yes, I cannot stop the structural inequalities that devalue my work, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop talking about it. So you have to find a way to have a kind of self motivation, finding other sources for motivation, not external, or maybe they are from community and family. I mean, that's where I get all of mine, and have that be your source of inspiration. And just quiet that other voice. I always tell people, quiet that voice that says, I don't know how to write, I have nothing to say, and what I have to say is unimportant. I know it's easier said than done, but at least write it down and put it on a Post-it note on your computer. Please be quiet, that voice. You don't need to hear it. It's not helping you. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we've gotten a number of questions. In the interest of time, though, I think we're just going to take 3 of them, and then we'll take the rest at the end.
Okay.
So the first question is, are there opportunities for students to become reviewers to get experience with the process?
Usually not. They're looking for people with an intellectual identity and reputation. But on a small journal and a graduate journal, that kind of thing, yeah. There's probably graduate publications everywhere in every field, and I would encourage you to seek out. The more you learn about the process, the better it is for you. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Next question. Do we have the support from somebody to submit an article? I mean, is there anybody available to help with the submission process?
That's the job of your advisors. That's what they're supposed to be doing. I don't know if the question was like, is there something at the U, your organizers?
No, No, I don't know
Yeah.
if the person
Yeah,
was
I
referring
mean,
to at the journal.
not
or-
at a journal level, no. I mean, I know, okay, the journal I used to run at that organization, Mujeres Activas en Letras y Cambio Social, we run a writing workshop every summer, and it's for the cost of membership and registration for the conference. Other journals do similar things. They cost $1,000, so find out if it's worth it first. Ours is totally worth it. The other ones, like in theater, you get 10 minutes with an editor. I don't think it's worth $1,000. So there is some, but usually you have to pay. So, you know, look at, and it gets back to the same thing. Go to your advisors and say, what's in the field that I could, you know, that's their job.
What is the best way to find out the journal editor's current priorities? My advisor suggested following the editor on social media, Twitter, but what are some other ways?
Well, when they were appointed, they probably wrote an editorial, you know, review, some kind of statement in the front pages of the journal. That's where I would look. God, I would hate to follow someone on Twitter or social media. So, sounds like a huge waste of time. You're looking for their intellectual priorities, not their personal preferences, you know, like whether or not they had cheese pizza for dinner. You know what I'm saying? Like sometimes social media, that's all it is. So unless they're active in a particular way on social media, I'm not sure that's a use of time I wouldn't put more than 10 minutes a month into that. But you can, you know, they probably put a statement, or when they were recruited, right? So they were announced to the profession in the profession's newsletter. Oh, so-and-so is the new editor, and they're going to tell you about their vision there. So that's what I would recommend.
Okay, should we move on, or there are more questions, but we can save those to
Yeah, I think we need to keep it going. This is perfect timing though, so thank you, Professor Davalos, for staying perfectly on point.
And then I can
Appreciate
go. You don't need me anymore, right?
We don't need you anymore. Thank you
Thank you so much.
much for being
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
Good luck, everyone. Keep
Thanks.
writing 30 minutes a day. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. So it's back to me.
So, I will go back to sharing the screen.
Thank you.
Right? I'm not right now. Okay.
You are
and
not.
I'm really sorry. My dog is really upset today, and I don't know why. He's in here crying.
We've all been there. We've all been there, dog.
Okay. Are you seeing it now?
Yeah. Okay. So let's just pause for a moment. Just to think about, just reflect on what Professor Davalos had to say and what you've heard so far. And I learned a lot just now, and I really appreciated that perspective so much. And if you had written anything down earlier, or you know, maybe some of you put your thoughts in the chat, but just revisit that and see if you feel like you've added some things to what you might want to consider going forward. And I'm just gonna like pause for 30 seconds to let people reflect. And if you need to get up to stretch or whatever you might need to do, get some water, feel free to do that. And I'm gonna start right now. Okay, that was 30 seconds. So we can go on to the next slide now. So this is going to be really funny given the answer to the last question, because one thing that I was going to suggest to folks, if you're looking for some inspiration of where you might figure out what journals people are publishing in the areas that you are interested in, that you want to write in. And I actually think that social media can be a pretty interesting place to gather ideas if you are strategic about who you're following and what the quality is of the stuff that they're sharing. So I know these are too small for you to see, so I'm just going to tell you what you're seeing here. I follow a scholar from the New School named Shannon Mattern, and she's an anthropologist, but she works in new media. And one of the reasons that I really enjoy following Shannon on Twitter is because Shannon loves to share resources from scholars that she follows, that she's reading. She loves to boost people's work, comment on it, and solicit suggestions from other scholars on texts that they might use in a course, or just basically like does a lot of crowdsourcing, has a very egalitarian, open spirit, and is very interested in getting a wide range of perspectives on her own work. And it makes sense given the nature of the work she does, but I think there's people like this in a lot of fields. So I just put it on here as, I started with this post of hers, one of the responses to it, so that's in the middle, that post-colonial studies in the middle. And then to the left, you see that one of her followers responded with something that they had written, which she retweeted. And then also this led to me looking at her course website, which was linked in that first tweet. So over in the bottom left corner is the readings for one of their class periods, which, there's some journal titles that you can see there already, but then there's a reference to their Zotero repository, which, you might think of Zotero, if you're familiar with it, as something you use for citation purposes, but it can also be something you use collaboratively with other scholars or people you're researching with. So she's chosen to use it as a way of kind of housing all of the readings for her course. And so from looking in that library, I was able to pull out this huge list of journals that people that they're reading in their course were publishing in. So the one, Big Data and Society, came up several times, so that was clearly a winner. But then some of the other ones had multiple articles as well. So it's just another way of finding journals, and you still want to keep in mind all of the things that Professor Davalos talked about in terms of not being a dabbler and knowing what you're getting into, and not just giving it a shot or whatever. But I think that sometimes you just might not have been exposed to the range of things that you that could be possible for you. So this is just a creative use of social media that I think can be productive. Obviously it's not for everyone.
All right, yeah, and I am not the social media wizard that Alexis is, so I learned a lot from her here too. Okay, so I'm gonna go back, and this section really is the main section, this choosing a journal, of what we're talking about today. And some of the things that I'm going to say will be the same things that Karen said, and that is actually made us feel good because it felt like we were talking about the right things then. So before you even start writing, there are things that you need to take into consideration. So who are you writing for? How do you engage with other researchers in your field? Are you hoping to reach other academics, or are you hoping to reach practitioners? I think of my colleagues who support researchers in education, and there are times where those researchers would want to be talking to other people researching education, and then there are times where they want their research to be supporting the teachers. And then we talked a little, or Professor Davalos talked a little bit about interdisciplinarity, and that's another thing to think about. Is what you're going to be writing about something that you think will be pretty limited in interest to people in your discipline, or is it something that you think has a broader audience? You'll also want to think about what it is that you're hoping to publish. So are you doing an original research article? Are you doing a literature review? Is it a case study, a systematic review, something else that we didn't even think of? There are all sorts of different things that you might write. Another thing to take into consideration is how long you'll need. So how many words do you think you'll need to get your point across? If you have a 2,000 word item, it will probably go somewhere different than if you need 20,000 words to explain what you are doing. Another question is, which journals are you reading? There's almost certainly some literature that you are building your research off of, and see where were those things published. Another way of doing this, if you if you just want a broader area or a broader perspective, think about how do you find literature? And a lot of us would use a literature database, something probably that the library subscribes to. And on the handout, there is either a link or an explanation of how to get to a place where you can find all of the databases that the library subscribed to that would be relevant for a particular discipline. I'm going to go through an example, and this is also definitely a disciplinary differences thing. My default, my favorite database is Web of Science because it's pretty broad reaching. It does actually have an arts and humanities index and a social sciences index, but it wouldn't really be like the #1 place to go for some of those topics. But I would just do a search on the topic that my research is in. And also my default is antimicrobial peptides because back when I was a chemical engineering grad student, that was what I was researching. So I just would search on this as a topic. And I limited this to the last 4 years, I think, and there were about 9,000 articles that were published on this topic. And in Web of Science, there's a link to, or there's a button you can click on to analyze results. And if you click on that and then click on source title, so you want to analyze by source title, it gives you information about where those articles have been published. And the tree map is pretty, but not super useful. It only has the top 10 journals. And there, you might not want to publish in any of those. If you scroll down a little bit, you will see an ordered ranking of journals by the number of articles on that particular topic. And this is just the first 25. I think it will show you 500 on the screen, or if not, there is a thing down at the bottom where you can export the full list of journals. And that would be a place where you might come up with titles that you would have never thought of. So like I was just saying, you may be familiar with the journal, you may not be familiar with it at all. If you're not familiar with it, take a look at a few issues and see if there are papers published in that journal that are similar to what you're hoping to publish. Another thing to do is to see if there's any names of authors that are familiar. If you're new to the research field, you might not have like the names of the people in your fields. After a couple years of PhD grad school, I had like a few people that were famous in my head. So Benoit Roux, and if Benoit Roux published in a journal, that was probably a place where my research would also fit in. And I have another one for libraries research, who he has never met me, but he's very famous to me. Then you want to, if it seems reasonable, then you want to go look in more depth. And so you go visit the journal's webpage. And I have an example here, but these are the kinds of questions that you would be looking at. Oh, sorry. The kinds of questions that you would be looking at to try to, at the website to try to find the answers to. So does your topic even fit within the scope of the journal? If you don't fit within the scope, you're going to get that immediate desk rejection. Is there something other than text that you need to go along with your article? And does the journal support the sharing of that in some way? Videos, data sets, and code were the kinds of things that I was thinking of, but again, there could be plenty of other ones. Is it easy to read the articles and navigate the articles on the website? Do they provide PDFs? If you have a hard time with that, how will your readers feel about it? And then also you want to pay attention to whether the journal does charge publication fees. So I have an example here of a journal, and it's not one I've ever published in, but Plant Physiology. And on their webpage, there is a section for authors, and submit a manuscript is like where you actually go to upload something, but instructions for authors would be what we would want to look at. We see there are all of these different sort of FAQs. The first thing that you would do is look at the scope. Does your stuff fit in what they say they do publish? And also perhaps more importantly, if you are doing an article that is purely descriptive in content, Plant Physiology will not publish this. So don't even waste your time with this journal. Another thing, it will tell you what kinds of article types, whether they accept review articles, and then also the process. And that we'll talk a little bit more about the peer review process later on. So the last question I had on there is does the journal charge publication fees? And in this case, we will be talking about open access later on, and there can be publishing fees related to open access, but some journals charge you fees to publish in a subscription journal that your readers will have to pay for. And in the upper left corner here, these are actually the charges for plant physiology. So if you are not a member of the society that publishes that and you want to publish a journal, and again, this is in a journal that people have to pay to read, you have to pay $2,100. If you don't have that money, you would have to see if they can give you a waiver or find another outlet. There are some other fees that journals can charge that at this point seem kind of weird, given that most people interact with journals online. So some journals will charge for color figures. In this case, this journal charges $600 per color figure. So if you don't have that money, make sure that you can share the information that you need to share in black and white. Another journal charges a submission fee. That is more common in some disciplines than others. I feel like I've had people say that it's more common in economics. It can be a legitimate fee, but you have to think about whether you have that money, if you want to spend that money, knowing that this is just to submit it and they might come back and say, no, we're not going to publish this, and you're out $50. I guess I would say talk to your advisor, talk to other people in your department before you do that. This particular journal has a page charge, which also seems weird because most journals aren't doing all that much sales in print, but this is $179 per page. Other journals will have a page charge that goes into effect when your article hits a certain length. So sometimes it's like you can have 8 pages for free, but if you're going to have any more than that, you get charged some amount of money per page. So if you want to publish there and you don't have any money, you might want to make sure that you can keep your article within 8 pages. Okay, I showed you on that one website where there would be some information about the peer review process. And on the journal's website, you would want to see that they have a policy and that it's clearly defined so that you know what's going to be happening to your paper once you give it to them. There are different types of peer review. So single blind peer review is when the peer reviewers would know who you are, but you wouldn't know who the reviewers are. Double blind is where neither the reviewers nor the authors know who each other are. And if you're doing research, or I'm sorry, if your article mentions like where you are from, that information would be redacted when it goes to the peer reviewers. There's also open peer review where everybody gets to know who everybody is, including people outside of the journal. So the regular reader would also be able to know who had done the peer review. And then this is a more recent development, but there is also post-publication peer review. So in this situation, you would submit your article. It would be inspected by the journal editor to make sure that it fits within the scope, and then it would be posted. And then they would have peer reviewers who review it, and you would be able to view the peer reviews alongside the publication. Another thing that can be difficult to find out is how long the publication process might take. And I cannot figure out how to pronounce this word. It could be cabals, it could be cables. Cabals is what I'm going to go with. It is a database that the university subscribes to for certain disciplines, and it has information about how long the process would take, the type of peer review. I think that is a place that also has information about acceptance rates. And if you are in one of these disciplines and you can't find this in some other source, Alexis can talk a little bit more about finding out this information for more humanities-based fields. Sometimes the journals will provide on the article information about the timeline. So this is something that was just on the first page of an article So the author submitted it in February, and then nine months later, it was returned to them after peer review and accepted. Then you also might want to find out how long the average amount of time is from when it's accepted until when it's published. Like I mentioned, that one article that I had submitted and accepted, and then it wasn't published for a long time. Some journals do have a rolling publication, and so the article would be posted online as soon as it's expected. And that's information that should be on the journal's webpage. Okay, so this is kind of the opposite of using a database to find a journal to publish in. Now, if you have a journal in mind, how will people be able to find out about it? And one of these sources that I didn't know about until I went to library school is called Ulrich's Web. And you go in and you can search on a journal title. The data in there is messy. So I searched for the FASEB journal, which is one of those ones that charge the submission fee. And it has 3 different entries for it. I can kind of explain why, but I'm not going to take that time. But you do see over here, this black and white thing is meant to be a referee's jersey. So this means that the journal is peer reviewed. The E means that it is available electronically. The little lock logo would mean that it's open access. And then usually you click on the link next to the star, because it's supposed to mean that the journal has gone through and certified that this information is correct. But if you click on the title of the journal, one of the drop downs that you can get to is abstracting and indexing. And so it would give you a list of all of the different places where that journal is indexed, where people might find your article. So if you know that people in your field use CAB abstracts to find literature, then this might be a good journal to publish in because it is indexed there. Another question that you would want to ask is whether your audience will be able to access the article. Journal subscriptions can be very, very expensive. And if you are publishing in certain journals, the only people who will be able to read those articles are people who maybe afford to subscribe on their own, or are an institution that can afford to subscribe. There's kind of this journal that everybody hates on that costs $20,000 per year. If you publish there, you're really going to be limiting your access to people at probably large, well-funded institutions. Whereas open access would be available for anyone. And I think we've said this a couple of times now, but we will be talking about open access in a little bit. Open access would be a good place or a good feature if you were hoping to reach practitioners. And Alexis, I think you were going to talk about journal quality.
Sorry, I had to find my button. I'm here.
Okay.
Excuse me. Yes, that's correct. I was going to do that. All right, let me get to the slides I'm supposed to be on. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, so, you know, it's hard to talk about journal quality because it's extremely subjective. It's very disciplinarily specific, and there's just a lot of factors. So I just came up with a few, and this is all it depends on, it's very different for every discipline, but some of the things that determine quality or reputation, and I really should have put scare quotes on those things, but one of the things that, you know, you might look at longevity of a journal. So, you know, an example would be like the Journal of the American Medical Association's been around for over 100 years. And as you might imagine, they have a pretty good reputation based on that consistent quality over a long period of time. You might look at acceptance rates of articles, and that, I think that's very disciplinarily specific, but some of you, if you're in the humanities, you might look at the link I shared in the chat for a small, not right now because it's a video, but a tutorial on looking up publication information in MLA, which is the Modern Languages Association International Bibliography. And a lot of journals will tell you how many submissions they receive in a year and then how many articles they end up publishing. So that could just be a good barometer, I guess, of whether, you know, like how selective are they being, how many people are clamoring to publish there versus how many are they actually accepting. So I think that's, you know, again, you know, this is all quote unquote quality, but it is, you know, something that might give you an indication of the reputation, at least, of a journal. And then there's the journal impact factor, which I keep promising we're going to talk about, but we are going to talk about it more later. That, again, is very disciplinary specific, because that's not a thing that most humanities disciplines pay a lot of attention to. And you'll understand that a little bit better when we talk about it later, because it's, yeah, we'll just leave it there, leave it dangling for the moment. And then how do you judge a newer journal? There's a lot of journals come up in emerging disciplines that, and in new methodologies and scholarly communities, and they may have higher acceptance rates because they cover a much narrower area with a lot fewer researchers. So that's not necessarily an indicator that it's low quality just because they're accepting a lot of articles. And journals spring up with changes in the academy, and they can represent a correction of historic injustices, representing marginalized voices and challenges to established methodologies. All of these are really good reasons for building new journals to find, you know, as a home for new scholarly communities. And they won't have the longevity or necessarily the like selectiveness in terms of, you know, the rate of how much they of acceptance for articles, but that doesn't really have anything to do with the quality. It just has to do with the newness and the specificity of what they're publishing. So this is just, you know, these are just some things to think about. It's not a, you know, this is a very humanities-ish way of answering this question. Is, you know, it really depends, and it's really, there's a lot of context you need to have to make these decisions. And the things that I would say that, you know, ultimately is to ask around to faculty, to other graduate students, to see, you know, what they know about certain journals, read up on them, read the journals themselves. You are good judges of quality already, so you should trust your gut. So yeah, that's just a very quick little word on quality.
Okay, good. All right, and now we're on to the next section. So copyright, there's a lot to say about copyright, and I'm not the person to say that. So I just want to give you some very, very basic information. Section 108 of the US Copyright Code is the place that lays out the rights, what rights copyrights are, and it also explains what sort of things are copyrightable. As an example, data, you can't copyright data. An article, though, would count. One of the major things that you need to know is that you don't have to do anything to get a copyright. At the time that the thing that is copyrightable is first fixed, the copyright exists. It appears immediately. So in the case of an article, that would be as soon as it's written down, if you did the writing, you own the copyright. You don't have to publish that work to have copyright protection. A lot of publishers will ask you to sign a copyright transfer agreement. What this says is that you give over any copyright to your article that you had to the publisher, and then you don't have those rights anymore. Publishers don't actually need you to do that. They need you to give them permission to print your or publish your article. They just would like for you to sign them all over. There are ways that you can negotiate to keep some or all of your rights, and there's more information at the Z link, and that's manage rights, which is kind of awkward. A little bit more. So if you are wanting to use someone else's work in your own, you need to seek permissions. So if there is an image or maybe a plot in somebody else's article that you want to reuse in your own, you have to figure out who owns that copyright. It's quite possible that the journal or the publisher owns the copyright and not the authors, and ask for permission to use that. You will want to make sure that you retain your rights to include anything in your thesis that you published prior to graduation. This is something that is more common in some disciplines than others. In some, you write your thesis and then you go about trying to publish either the whole thing or parts of it. In science and engineering, it's more common that we would write articles and then the thesis would be kind of a compilation of articles that you've written. Some journals do give an automatic exception, but back when I was putting my thesis together, I did have to contact at least one publisher to ask for permission to include the thing that I had written into the thing that I was writing. One last thing, when you are at submitting your thesis, they will offer you the opportunity to pay for formal registration of your copyright. It's purely optional. You own the copyright regardless because you are the one that fixed it into a permanent format. And I think back when I was doing this, it was like $50 to register your copyright. And then also back then, $75 to have your thesis put on microfilm. And I did this a while back, but it was still in the 21st century. And who really uses microfilm, but I still had to pay $75 for that. We have a librarian, a copyright librarian, Nancy Sims, who's wonderful, and she'll do a workshop sometime this spring about avoiding thesis dissertation copyright tragedies. And we'll make sure that Nora knows about that and can share that information out to everybody who's registered for this. Open access is very closely related to copyright. It is a way to make sure that you and others can use your research. The most basic definition of open access is that it's scholarly research that is free to any reader anywhere in the world, assuming they have an internet connection, and is also free of most copyright and licensing restrictions. Open access does not mean poor quality. Open access journals and paths still maintain high levels of rigor and quality. It just makes the increases access and visibility to your work. And lots of things can be open access monographs. You can have open data too. And there's a lot more information at the Z link on the screen. I just wanted to give a little bit more information about open access. This is a topic that I can talk your ears off about, but just two different ways that you can make your work open access. So the first is usually referred to as green open access. In this situation, you would publish your article in a traditional subscription closed access journal. And then you would take a copy of the article and put it into an open access repository. Here at the university, we have the University Digital Conservancy, and you could put your article in there. However, it does require that you retain rights as an author. So if you sign your copyright away totally to the publisher, you wouldn't be able to do that. Some publishers do allow certain versions just by default that you can put them into your repository, and Sherpa Romeo is a site that keeps nice track of different publisher policies and different journal policies. The other option is to have your item be born open, and there's kind of two ways to do this. You could publish in a fully open access journal. Some of these, some of these do require an APC, which is an article processing charge. And this is kind of jargony, but gold open access would mean probably that you did have to pay an article processing charge for your article to be published in that journal. And then the new thing is that if you as the author don't have to pay any fees, that's called diamond or platinum open access because it's more precious than gold. There's also hybrid journals. And in this case, your article will be open, but it is published in a subscription journal. And in this case, you always have to pay an APC. There is a site called DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals. It's just doaj.org, and it has, at the time I took the screenshot, 13,785 fully open access journals in it. And if you see over in the left-hand column, there's a filter, or a facet to filter out if they have article processing charges or the range of charges. Oh no, that was a link. Okay. As I said, some journals do charge author fees, and this could be for article processing charges to make something open access or just other charges. and they might have an FAQ on their website that says that they can't waive or discount this, but you should just ask anyway, especially if you can show that you don't have any source of funding to cover this. The university doesn't have a fund to support paying any sorts of author fees. We used to have a very small fund that funded a few article processing charges per year, but we don't have that anymore, regardless of what a publisher might tell you. And we do have some agreements with some publishers that would be would give a discount on an APC, or sometimes completely you wouldn't have to pay an APC at all. And that link is where all of those are listed. Okay, predatory publishers. I put this in scare quotes because people talk about it like it's this really big problem, and it's kind of not really. We like to say you should think about this as questionable publishers. Some open access publishers were labeled as predatory, and quite honestly, there were racial undertones to how that term was being applied. And there's really sort of a gray area between you have fake journals, which are a thing, poor quality journals, and predatory journals. So fake journal would be something that you absolutely want to avoid. This would be a case where maybe they say on their website that they are going to do some peer review process. You submit your article, they don't actually do the peer review, they immediately put it up on their website and then tell you that you need to pay them money. That can cause some problems, and the copyright librarian can sort of help you with that, although you've basically kind of lost your article. There are poor quality journals that just don't, well, Alexis just talked about quality. And there are journals that are just like not very copy edited. And you'd probably want to avoid journals like that. And then predatory, again, it's just it's a questionable issue. Predatory behaviors that term could be applied to most publishers for something that they do. So I would argue that a journal that charges both a subscription to read and a couple $1,000s just to publish in it, I feel like that's a predatory behavior. And the reason that publishers are able to do this is because of the academic reward system. And Professor Davalos talked about that a little bit, but people at least perceive that they must publish or perish. And because of this pressure to publish, publishers are allowed to get away with a lot of things that wouldn't happen in other situations. Like I was saying, the way predatory was being used was I do not know how to finish that sentence, and this will be fun for the recording, but all I want to say is that not all publishers that are outside of the global north, and by global north, we're pretty much talking about US, Canada, and Western Europe, they're not all bad. There are plenty of good journals from other places. And not all researchers publishing in predatory journals are from non-global north countries. There are people at the U who have published in what some people have labeled as predatory journals, but they've had reasons for why they've published there. The first link is the library's website with a bunch of tips on figuring questions that you can ask yourself when you're reviewing a particular journal or maybe a conference to attend. The link down at the bottom is a pretty interesting article that I recommend reading. There are such thing as fake conferences, and this would be where there's a website and it tells you that there's going to be all these different sessions and maybe some people that will be at this conference, and then you get there and none of that is true. There's nothing going on there. And Think, Check, Submit is a similar sort of checklist to look through to compare your journal with that is put out by groups, associations of publishers. Okay. Alexis, do I need to pause or should I just keep going? We're almost at the end. I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, I think you should keep going.
Okay. Scholarly metrics, and Alexis had mentioned journal impact factors. So there are some people that really like to talk about metrics. Some of the commonly used ones would be journal impact factor, which is a kind of strange calculation of how often a journal's articles are cited. And then there are various metrics to describe an author and perhaps put a quantitative value on you. So that could be the total number of publications, the total number of citations, the average number of citations per publication. And then there's this thing called the H index, which is when a person has H or more papers with H or more citations. I need a visual aid for that, but then Alexis is actually scared of the visual aid. So I won't go into that anymore. Journal impact factor is really the most pervasive and influential metric for assessing the quality of the journals, but it's not something that you compare across disciplines. A quote unquote good journal impact factor for a humanities journal would be incredibly different, multiple, like many times lower than the journal impact factor for a good medical journal. The GIF doesn't say anything about a particular article. This is an average calculation. So there can be plenty of articles within a journal that are not cited at all. And doesn't consider the nature of the citation, whether that's positive or negative. And it's actually fairly easy for journals and publishers to manipulate by determining certain things that they would publish. And I just have an example of how this applying quantitative metrics can go wrong. So I imagine that most of you have heard of the study that links vaccines and autism and how that is been completely retracted, as you can see here for this article. And that was Andrew Wakefield, who was the lead author on this. We see that this article has been cited 1,422 times, which, you know, that's a large number. So it has a good, high, large number of total citations. But a lot of those citations are saying this article completely refutes or invalidates this particular article. So is that something that is useful? Or is that something you want to be said about your work? I mean, obviously you don't want anything to be retracted, but you can't make a judgment on whether something is high quality or not, just based on the number of citations. Same thing with a journal impact factor. So the article on the previous page was published in the Lancet. And I actually can't explain to you why the impact factor grew so much over this 20-year period, but the last year that we have journal impact factor data for, it was over 60. I also get very upset about the number of decimal places that the people who release journal impact factors feel like they should use. If you have in your field an impact factor for a particular journal that's 1.2 versus 1.4, those are the same. Like it's not 1.23 versus 1.24 is any sort of difference. But this journal has a high GIF, and yet it has published a terrible article that has been retracted. And the same thing with the author. He has a kind of relatively high H index, although that really does depend on the field. It also depends on the age of the researcher. But this does not mean that he is a good researcher. There are various things that can influence citation counts. So absolutely what discipline it is in, the institution where the authors are from, which journal it's in, which country the authors are from, and other sorts of social biases that can play a role in this. And I just want to say that evaluation of the quality of scholarly work does not require quantitative metrics. There are two links on the bottom for a statement and a manifesto about how these quantitative measures should not be used to measure scholars. Alexis, this is to you.
Yeah, we're bringing it home. We're almost there.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, you can go ahead. We're going to talk about scholarly identity, and I'm going to read you this comic really quick. So standing figure says, "What are you doing?" And sitting figure says, "I'm publishing my first paper and I need to pick my author name. Should I use my middle name or just the initial, a second last name?" Seated figure says, "It's the name I'll be known as in all the history books. If I don't pick something unique, people might confuse me with another author." Standing figure says, "Wouldn't that increase your impact factor?" And then seated figure says, "Bob Smith it is." So obviously we know that your scholarly identity is really important and you don't really want to name yourself Bob Smith, but how do you deal with it if you have a name that is fairly common, or you might change your name later, or you might go by a name professionally or personally or both that is not your quote unquote government name, right? There is a solution out there, and it's called an ORCID ID. It sounded like an ad, and it's really not, but I do think ORCID ID is pretty great. So if you have not already made an ORCID ID, I would highly recommend doing so soon. The ORCID ID is a persistent, unique personal identifier. So it's like a string of numbers, I think, maybe letters, I can't remember right now, but
16 digits.
what's that?
It's 16 digits.
16 digits. So yeah, think about it as like a much more public social security number in a way, a little longer too, but and it'll follow you throughout your career, no matter what your name is or how common your name is. And you can use it in manuscript and grant submissions. You just do it once, you keep using it forever. And then there are a lot of publishers that are listed here that actually require you to use an ORCID ID. And I've encountered this in some of the things I've submitted that they expected it. It wasn't required, I guess, in all the ones I've seen, but they definitely encouraged it. So it's definitely something to look into soon, because I think it's becoming more and more common to see that as something that's asked for. So yeah, that's the pitch for that. And then just another element of scholarly identity is, just what is your public online persona like? Professor Davalos kind of alluded to this, like, do you want everyone to know what you had for dinner or what your cat's name is? Or do you really want to have like a public facing persona that's something that is only representing you professionally? So it's just thinking about your social media accounts, like, are they public or private? How much do you want to lock them down? Or do you want to be an open book, what you see is what you get kind of person? That is a choice that you can make. I don't think that you can really say definitively either way which way is correct. So I think that it's really a matter of personal choice, and to think about how much privacy you'd like to have as you go forward. And that's not just true for your academic work, that's just in life. And then, are we going to that site? Is that
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Do that.
We don't need to. I just this is also in the handout. The Research Impact Challenge is something that you can do on the library website, and the first 5 days focus on scholarly identity. It might be a good thing to just get yourself set up with that. And then finally, just the last few tips. You can go forward again. Managing your stuff. If you don't use a citation manager, I suggest that you get one and you start trying it. The earlier you use it, the better, because the one thing I've heard the most from students I've introduced to citation managers is, I wish I knew about this when I was doing my coursework, or I wish I knew about this in undergrad. I wish I knew about this, blah, blah, blah. So you'll wish that you knew about it sooner once you start using one, and we'll share some information about workshops on that as well. Data management, there's some videos linked in the slides. The libraries host a data management boot camp it's beginning of every semester, basically. So we just had one, unfortunately it was yesterday, but you can look out for the August one. It'll come, that information should come your way sometime this year. There's lots of other workshops. There's a link there. And then there's the research support services from the library, which you'd be amazed by the range of things that there are people to help with on your projects and on your research, and even in your teaching. So you can go to the next one. And this, just the takeaway message is that this is all scary, it's overwhelming, but just don't be afraid, because you've got this. I really appreciated that Professor Davalos brought that like confidence and knowing who you are and what you bring to the table. You totally have that. It can be hard, and it's easy to doubt yourself, but you can do it. And there are so many people happy to help you. There's a link to the subject librarian. So every discipline has its own subject librarian who can help you. And then everything's happening too fast. I don't know what's going on. And then the last slide, I think you need to go back one, Allison. Oh no, we're going the wrong way. There we go. It's just some of the upcoming workshops that are happening. Mendeley and Zotero are both citation managers. So you could find out a little bit about those two citation managers in our library workshops, or there's also a workshop coming up in February on data visualizations. So, and there's tons of more where that came from. So just keep your eyes open for that. And I think we're gonna take a few questions if there are any, right? Because we've got like 5 minutes.
Yeah, so, and just to point out in the chat, a couple people posted information on some graduate student journals. In one covers public health, and the other one covers development policy and education. So those would be opportunities to get involved in those. One of the questions is, are there journals that typically exclude grad student submissions, or are they typically all inclusive? Or does it vary and we just need to read the fine print?
So there, I can think of journals. There are undergraduate journals and grad student journals where you have to be either undergraduate or grad student. Most of them wouldn't say something about that on their site. And in a lot of journals that wouldn't matter, but as Alexis was telling me about, there are journals, especially in the humanities, where it's a pretty closed system of people who are allowed to communicate in those channels. I don't know how you go about figuring that out. I guess you'd have to just take a look and see who's been publishing there and if they're like big names in the field.
And someone just posted about the citation manager workshops. How often?
Yeah.
How often are they repeated?
So definitely every semester, and I know that at times we have added more. I hate to put Noro on the spot here, but maybe if you put that in the feedback form, she can share that with us. And if there are particular ones, we can see if there are people in the libraries to support, to provide those workshops. The libraries support 3, EndNote, Mendeley, and Zotero. And I think you probably have just missed the EndNote workshop, but
Yeah.
you will probably want to use whatever other people in your lab group are using.
I just want to add one thing to that too. Depending on your discipline, and it may be that like I've done workshops, for example, just for philosophy graduate students because it was requested. So if graduate students in your department are interested in having a departmental workshop, either your library subject librarian or one of the people on our citation management team could probably do a workshop in that smaller, a more bespoke workshop for your group of people.
Yeah, and I've
I like that term.
And I've done the same. And also Zotero, I would say Zotero especially is something designed for that you can start trying out as soon as you download it. And it is very user friendly. Mendeley also to some degree.
Yeah.
So, you could also just reach out and we can, I think all the librarians are pretty much knowledgeable about citation managers.
And I just want to make sure you saw the link to the workshop evaluation that Allison was talking about. It's not just an evaluation of this workshop, but it's also your way to tell me what other topics you're interested in, you would like the graduate school to collaborate with other units to provide for you. So part of the reason that we're having this workshop is because graduate students from former workshops listed publishing as a very important topic. So I take these evaluations seriously, especially the part about what else can we offer for you. And that's how my work is informed, by getting feedback from you. Thank you.
So I don't see any other questions that haven't been addressed.
Well, it's perfect timing then, because we're just about at the end, and I see people dropping off like flies.
Yeah.
So it's perfect. Well, thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you very much.
Oh, anybody who wants to leave, fine. My publishing, okay. So conference publishing versus peer-reviewed journal publishing, it's very discipline specific, especially like computer science and electrical engineering. Conference papers are one of the major modes of communication. If you'll have to think about, if you have a conference in mind, do they publish the proceedings from that? And is the proceedings thing that they would publish the same thing that you would want to publish in a journal? If not, make sure that whatever you are sharing at a conference in a printed format, that you're not plagiarizing yourself by sending the article to the conference and having the conference publish it in their proceedings and also in a journal. That's frowned upon. Oh, and sorry, a question about, oh boy, to support submitting an article. That's not something that the libraries can help with, because pretty much every journal has a different submission system, or at least every publisher has a different submission system. And quite honestly, we have never seen what it looks like on the the author's perspective. I would talk to your advisor and see if they can give you help. Noro, I don't know when the article or the recording will be available, but I imagine that you can let people know.
Yep, absolutely. So it will be on the graduate school website, career and academic support, but I will also send an email to let you know, to give you the link. So Allison, you're actually the one that's gonna get the link from Cloud, and if you forward it to me, I will make sure everybody gets it.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Allison, Alexis, Brian. This was a phenomenal opportunity to hear about this very important topic. We're very grateful. Thank you very much, and have a good day, everybody.
Bye.